So, we're going to talk about some basic lore reality. It's not really lore reality. Here's how the history, here's how you can make a CPU like this, here's how you can hack, here's how a lot of that stuff that I just posted previously before, which was a short 20-minute video or something. Okay, so here's how to combine hacks. We're going to go with combining hacks right now. All right, we know about the predictive analysis cache bug hack on CPUs. All right, which means that you can read what the CPU is doing. Now, if you happen to combine the software availability, meaning even though people say that it's encrypted, you can't find it, whatever, for routers, modems, and you know about the general IP protocols, internet protocols, that is, and how the software is that tells things what they're doing, and the overall, necessary ways that you can put that together with your chips and designs and so on, then you happen to know, by the way, which all of that you can find on forums, IT network forums, so on and so on. In fact, we used to have a big problem I was talking about back in the mid-2010s about how easy it was to hack networks, and then even easier back in the 2000s, and even easier in the 1990s. Okay. Now, what that means for me is, if you dress up, let's say you intrude on a network, and you install a basic backdoor, it's not going to show itself, because oh no, it'll have to show itself that it's there. No, they don't. That one, I've even done it myself. I accidentally fucking up my phone app on my phone, calling a pharmacy over and over, and I couldn't access the app because I'd already closed it, but it was still calling it. Which should ring a bell there in your head, going well, wait, if it's not seen, then we wouldn't see that it's doing that. And I'm right, but then you can monitor your CPU and everything. But it's if you know how to hack that, then you know how to change that programming to essentially just kind of get rid of it, or copy it, or just not display it to you. That's another program. It's basically run a program that says because they're trying to do this, insert that it's not happening. Now it's going to run a little hotter. Insert that it's not. Insert that it's this instead. Insert that it looks normal, basically. That's all you have to do. Okay? Now, once you do that, then you realize that you can run a program to gain the information, install it, compress it, compartmentalize it. Basically, it's this is what this program is doing. Okay? It takes the information, the bytes, and then it assigns them the values, like a hash. You know what I mean? And so, because you have the key on the other side, and you know that this will break out into this, meaning it will be calculated to mean with your on the other side breakout key, it turns into all of these other bytes of data. Now, because of this, you can compress it fairly significantly because you already know what that byte will be assigned for in bits. Because you can assign it into bits, you can have a few of these bytes become very large amounts of data, given a IP network protocol, run through, made to look like it's not there, happening, and then sent, because you tell it to a different ISP or the same ISP that it's going to go to, checking for hey, I'm sending a ping, send me back this. And it will. This is what it is. But then it also has a tack on, send this ping data over to somewhere else. Not just there, ping it to these two places. And for the ISP, it will look normal. And in fact, you can even tell it to delete that other log of that data because you installed or you just made the IP do that, meaning the packet. You can do that, but you don't need to intrude on their network, but you could do that. You could always bribe someone and just pay them. There's a few methods to that madness. And then you realize, I'm, well, smart and intelligent, clearly. Other people were knowing about that before, were smart and intelligent before I came up with this. And it was easier when they first started in the 70s or 60s as a network. Military, that is, because they were incentivized to do that. Because that's encrypting it as well and making it very hidden. In fact, basically non-existent unless you can effectively monitor everything on the CPU and what it is doing. And it doesn't already have these installed programs, so then you realize the government and more can just constantly have those installed programs. Not to mention any microphone, like your Google or Siri or Bixby or any of it, can send it to a data server that can crunch it, or store it, or get rid of it. But you too can also take that information and get it yourself. And it'll look normal, like no intrusion or software is there. In fact, you don't even need to install it on your phone or your computer. You just have to install it on their ISPs and servers. Now, once you get that information, then you can effectively spy on anyone. Now, when you realize that they could have done this back when they first created the internet, then it's most likely always been there. In fact, they would have always had it. You just didn't know. And there's all of a sudden the basic conspiracy, but it's like, kind of is, kind of isn't. It's just people that know about it and others didn't. And they told them, they didn't tell them. Which means pretty easy to make it a conspiracy. Because information not there, pretty easy. People just don't talk. Now, we're going to get into a CPU cooler design real quick. Because like people are watching. Clearly people are watching everyone. The hackers know about how to do this. The CPU little predictive analysis thing has been known about for a long time. That was 2010s again, but it was known well before 2010. That's that kind of thing. Same thing with like installing that kind of program on mini CPUs before the 2010s. So, we're going to go into a CPU cooler. Bear with me, it means a great deal actually. Now, the CPU cooler is a carbon onion ball and copper mix. There's a way to manufacture it, because carbon onion balls are going to float up to the top. So if you happen to have a argon driven and then a static charge difference, meaning argon is there where it's being heated. You heat up the argon, you put it in, keeps it warm and moist and sticky, tacky. You fire in an electrostatic difference, and you heat it up and then remelt it, or melt it and then you cool it off. And you fire them in every so often. And then eventually you get like a plasma of copper, and then your carbon onion balls cone, or cone of plasma, and then just regular carbon static difference, and you paint over it and it gets really smooth, and you have like this layered of carbon onion balls copper and very smooth copper carbon surface that you can then lap to extremely highly precise one atom kind of width increments. There's a whole New Mind YouTube video about how they do that, but like you can do it. Like people know how to do that. Point is, it's a metamaterial. That means very, very good at insulating because the carbon onion balls and the copper create a really good Faraday cage. But they're also very good at cooling. They're also very, very good at creating waveguide formations because of the carbon onion balls. As they pass through, they alter depending on how they are set in. Because you can make an electrostatic diaphragm, you can set them up in a very particular pattern that creates a very specific waveguide form that, if you pulse it the right way, can create a cavitation of non-existent EM fields, denoising the environment. Now, on top of that, you can place in copper tubes which are just regular tubes with little nano holes inside of them, cut in things. You can just use a laser to drill down and drill over, and because you can put it into a vacuum weight, you can then stick them together like they do up in space because there is no oxided layer. And so then you can weld them with no energy, make it a box. All of this can be done at home, by the way. Now, granted, some of it is expensive, but still doable. Now, if you happen to run really cold water, or let's say nitrogen, and then you had a pump that was really good at being insulated and happened to had pre-chilled nitrogen, and then pressurized into this small series of bigger basins to little tiny tubes that then curve, and you turn it and then it goes across the little really small little area that is structurally sound because you have multiple tubes all the way up until you have your micro to nano size fins at the very top. You can use helium or nitrogen or any of it. But the point is, you can also even use water. Water is actually pretty good at this because it can run so hot, and because it's under pressure, and because it's extracting it so quickly. And if you have a higher pressure and then a lower pressure, meaning let's say it's 10 psi and 4 psi respectively at the other side, you end up getting a very fast flow rate. Extremely fast, extremely good thermal transfer. And if you paste it correctly with a gallium direct to the CPU with little nano graphite structures that are vertically aligned, that have the correct distance, and then you fill in all the divots. Same thing for the cooler and the direct to die cooler, spreader, heat spreader. Then you have an enormously fast heat transfer device or transition, because it's not reflective as much, and because it's absorbing a large amount of electromagnetic interference from itself because of the carbon nanoballs, the gallium, and the graphite. And then you are waveguiding correctly through it. You create this huge cavitation where the CPU is with very low interference. In fact, non-existent interference. Then you think about my quantum tunnel, the little quantum tunnel field effect transistors that can be superpositioned, and I've talked about that. Go back in my Xenon Reality YouTube. I've talked about it. There's a couple of different ways of doing it, but essentially it's a laser and then creates a increased electron orbital that you then bump into a superposition, and because you use a bunch of vacuum, like a bunch of fields that create like a vacuum area effectively, that then allows for the tunnel to happen a longer distance, and it's entangled because it acts like it's an electron, but it's not an electron. There's nothing there. Nothing going to be there, but because it's kind of like it is, which are charge and electromagnetic fields respectively, okay, it then tunnels further. And it collapses, and then you get the result because you can detect that, and then an electric charge, which sends the information, and then you can use that as your qubit system. But because we now really hyper denoised it, we can specify down to nano degrees of increments of cavitation for these field areas and all the rest of it. So it's very, very denoised. It's very, very cold too. In fact, you don't even necessarily need to cool it down that hard. In fact, you can even make a holographic version, holographic wormhole. Ooh, wait a second, I'll get into that. We're going to use that to basically create greater and greater and higher degrees of denoised and better chips. In fact, you could probably do this without a need to cool it down nearly as hard as previously known about for regular qubit systems, because of how fast they can move through. And so the transistor goes into a higher clock, and it also has qubits that are denoised. And if you go into programming, which I've talked about briefly, it's going to be later, actually March 24th is when those videos come out, for how it is to specify a bit to be multiple bits, because it's a known about, like I just talked about for the programming here, since it's a known key system bit, you can store it into the cache, break it out, and that 1 or 0 that was calculated is now actually this 2-bit set of bits, which we now know is actually this meaning set of bits, which then turn into a series of byte information, a table row 16 total of bytes. Okay, and because you can do that and you can go further, you can then use that to effectively calculate great degrees of anything. Now, because of this, the qubit becomes massively potentiated, and because I'm using greater and greater degrees of qubits, which this is going to be a top-down approach. So if you don't know, as the wave propagates, you're going to try and match that wave propagation that you're going to push through the cooler. And so as it comes in, it creates these cavitation areas that are actually traveling with the qubit tunnel, making it more and more denoised until eventually you get your result. As a result of that, you can create an incredibly high accuracy, incredibly high degree precision, incredibly low noise, and more qubit speed clock rate CPU. Which means you have an enormously high and fast CPU potential of calculation. In fact, tremendous amounts, actually. But we're not done yet. We're not done yet. Remember about that holographic wormhole? Because it's so fucking cold, that wormhole can be taking a small little area, let's say it's an atom, or a group of atoms, and then you are wormholing it through a series of multiple different, layered, diagonally, vertically, horizontally, wormhole kind of design. Holographic. You'd have to get into quantum physics, look up holographic wormholes. Just do that before you say it's not a thing. They're a thing. And as a result, you then get memory. That's your cache. You also have the ability to use that as a calculator if you do it right. Now, as a result, because of that field effect, because of the transistor, because of all this stuff, because once it goes through this material, it creates a field effect which allows electricity, but more specifically photons now. Instead of using electricity, we can use photons. And because that photon is going to store that information inside that little memory, which that also sends it off to the next area for the next superposition collapse. And now you understand why it's a wave propagation from top-down approach. That then gives you a greater degree of control, variability, dynamic, logic gate, and all the rest of it. It's both a memory and a fucking transistor and a different series of different logic gates, and you get the picture. All of a sudden, it's like, wait, I don't even need them to be very, very far away, and because so even easier, less energy to make this work. It's also encrypted, unless you happen to know what that program is that's going to have that key in those cache systems. So, as a result, what I'm trying to get across is that little wormhole thing can be moved. Because you can calculate and then to basically entangle and then superposition and then bump it onto something else. That makes a wormhole computer be able to affect the world around us, if you don't know. Now, that is the timeline of that history lesson that I happened to talk about. Because if you fuck around with your brain and you think about it the right way, because that's basically how our brains work. If you don't know, give me 1 second. Because we can use a laser that's pulsing back and forth, and that instead of a light electron going through, back and forth hertz rate inside of a, cable, we can use light, and we can always add in more photons, to keep it going. There's nothing saying I can't do that. It just has to be the right, frequency and everything else. But what it means is I can increase the amplitude, and therefore that's a 1 or a 0. Meaning the spike, effectively, of it. And that's a 1 or that's a 0. Now, if you flow through this, I'm gonna have to. This is a bunch of programming. You're gonna have to get real good with me very, very quickly. So keep up. I need you to keep up real fast because you're gonna have to listen to this on the next video. That's right.